motorcycle was one of those things that became an instant success. Here was excitement, adventure and freedom in an affordable form for the ordinary man, and literally hundreds of manufacturers sprung up to satisfy demand. Some have slipped into obscurity while others became legends, but most are now long gone, confined to museums and history books. But there was a survivor from that forgotten era. Incredibly, it's still the same company, and even more incredibly, it's still the same basic engine.
That company is BMW, and that engine is their legendary shaft-drive Boxer twin.
BMW had been in the flying machine business, but the arrangements at the end of World War I meant German nationals were forbidden to fly, so the Munich manufacturers had to think of something fast. Back in Blighty, Douglas were well established, and BMW acquired the rights to build their bikes.
Before the First World War, most twin-cylinder motorcycles were V-twins, simply because that was the most obvious and effective way of fitting a motor into a cycle. But Douglas of Bristol thought differently and produced this horizontally opposed fore and aft flat twin.
BMW's chief engineer Max Fritz saw the weakness in the fore and aft design. The front cylinder got wet while the back one overheated. His solution was brilliant but simple. He spun the cylinders through 90 degrees so that the pistons punched out, and it was nicknamed the Boxer. BMW's R32 was unveiled at the Paris Motor Show in 1923 with 8.5 horsepower from its 500cc shaft-drive twin, which they immediately put to the best use by going racing and winning the German Championship in 1924 when they displayed an early enthusiasm for sidecars. It seems unfair that BMW should be tagged boring, when right from the start they had an insatiable appetite for speed. Here, Ernst Henner exhibits some unfinished ideas about aerodynamics. They dubbed him the White Phantom, and he broke the world record. BMW are big on tradition, but there's always been innovation too. The R12 of 1935 was the world's first production bike with telescopic forks. 1937 and Ernst Henner's back with much improved aerodynamics and yet another world record.
It was never ridden again, and perched in this excruciatingly uncomfortable position, I can understand why. Also, I'm not so sure if I fancy 174 miles an hour on tyres that look exactly like those you'd find on a wheelbarrow.
Today we expect out-and-out record breakers to share no more than a name with their road-going relations, but pre-war the rules were stricter.
You have to run with the same wheels, you have to run the same, more or less the same brakes, fork in the front, and the rear suspension, it should be a standard out from road bikes. You have to run the same fuel what you use on the road. At that bike, after the record, they kept it in the workshop there, and the whole team that works on that bike, it disappeared, you know. But the war starts, you know, people have to go to the war, and then all been knocked down, and it was nothing. And after the war, we found those things, you know, lying somewhere in a shit, you know, and we took it and we kept it here. And then eventually we made it with a, looks like it is now.
At BMW's Munich factory, racing improves the breed wasn't just an empty marketing slogan, it was a road-going reality. In 1939, they took much of what they'd learned from a quarter of a century of racing and record breaking and distilled it into this handsome machine.
The R71 was the first truly modern motorcycle, built for the first truly modern roads, the Autobahns.
At the last tourist trophy races held on the Isle of Man before the outbreak of war, BMW's legendary works rider, George Meyer, became the first non-British rider ever to win the senior race on a non-British machine. Meyer's win with the blown Boxer would form an unlikely inspiration for a bike-mad 7-year-old evacuee.
The impression it made on me as a youngster of this bike flying through the air with George Meyer in the seat going down Bray Hill in the Isle of Man was rather a lasting one. in 1980, I heard about the machine becoming available. It was tucked away in America somewhere. I promptly went home, did a research, found out where it was, agreed to fly to Boston, and that was it. I bought it. Overall, it presented itself as one of the finest race machine in the world at that time.
But even in its finest hour, the blown Boxer was living on borrowed time. No match for the multi-cylinder Gilera in a straight line. The BMW won races because George Meyer was a genius. And right throughout 39, they kept on winning, both on and off the road, until it was time for Boxer riders to put away leathers and pull on uniforms, where the qualities that had made the Boxer such a success in Civvy Street, its strength, its speed and its durability, would make it a formidable instrument of war.
I first saw a picture of one of these when I was 9. That did it for me. I went, that's the bike I've got to have. As the years went by and I first met this particular machine on the Dirty Dozen in 1966, and I pursued it and managed to buy it after Bridge Too Far in 1978. It's an ex-21st Panzer Division. This is a piece of history here. They have 4 forward gears, 1 reverse gear and a high and low ratio gearbox for cross country. You've got hydraulic brakes on the rear and the sidecar, telescopic forks, a huge air cleaner underneath the tank here so that you could actually wade in such sort of depth of water. Phenomenal traction once you've got the differential locked, and away they went. The Americans were extremely impressed by the first ones that they captured in the desert, and they sent the specification to Harley-Davidson, who built the XA, which is based on the R71 BMW, which is exactly the same spec, flat twin shaft drive, and in fact many of the parts in that bike are interchangeable with the R71. They built 1,000 of them, and then the Jeep came out, and the whole motorcycle program in America kind of got backpedaled because the Jeep came in.
Falling in love again, never once.
In just about every war film you'll ever see, an outfit identical to this one will make a brief appearance and get blown sky high. 2 reasons. 1, it looks spectacular, and 2, there's an endless supply of these Russian copies. They're as rough as bathtub vodka, and the options list is as short as a Siberian summer.
But it has got reverse.
Back in the 30s, the Russians had built Boxer engine bikes with the full cooperation of BMW. But in the 1940s, the Germans and the Russians had a fairly major falling out. Didn't bother the Russians though, they just kept churning them out, all based on that same early 40s R75. And they still do. Would you believe this combination is brand spanking new? And so is this one. No, really, it is. If the BMW engineers who built the R71 back in 1938 could see this contemporary Chinese copy, the Changjiang, then they'd spin in the graves faster than the shaft drive on George Meyer's race bike. Built for military, police and post office work, it's got a 750cc side valve engine and 24 horsepower. A ball of fire it is not. So if you're sending a postcard to your cousin in Canton, try a message in a bottle. It'll get there quicker. After the unfortunate episode between 39 and 45, BMW were once again left in ruins.
The BMW's at the starting gates, Zeller and the Meyer brothers, and they're off.
And it was another 5 years before the Boxers were allowed back on the track.
The BMW team accelerates for the final sprint. 120, 130, 140.
Post-war, supercharging was banned, but the old man Meyer just kept on winning races and was keen to pass on his immense knowledge to a new generation of racers and mechanics.
Am of Rhodesia, Honor Norton, had no hope against Meyer and Walter Zeller.
Also vor 50 Jahren, das war 1943, habe ich eigentlich das Lernen angefangen. Ganz kurz bei BMW in einem ausgelagerten Betrieb. Brauche ich nicht sagen, warum. Und dann hat man halt die Sachen selber entwickelt. Dann ist die Rennabteilung entstanden bei BMW. George Meyer war das absolute Ass.
Meyer set a new record lap of 127.9 kilometers per hour.
An seiner Maschine sehr viel, hat mir sehr viel erzählt von der Fahrerei, von der Touristrophe und wie die Maschinen behandelt hat, wie gefahren ist und so weiter. Leider lebt heute nicht mehr.
In the early 50s, Britain's bikers were offered a handsome new machine. With Earl's forks and a flat twin engine, it looked an awful lot like a BMW. But it wasn't.
Ironic, isn't it, that Douglas, who allegedly inspired the design of the world's most enduring motorcycle, should end up copying it quite so blatantly. Of course, when the motorcycling public were offered a choice between this British BMW and the real thing, it was no contest, and poor little Douglas went kaput.
But with the onset of the swinging 60s, it was BMW who were in big trouble. Their boxer bikes had always been expensive and exclusive, but in this trendy new age, fab and groovy, they were not.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is a car. However, there are a couple of very good reasons why you find me behind the big Bakelite wheel of this pretty BMW 700. The first, back there, is a boxer engine. 700 cc's, 30 horsepower, still good for around 75 miles an hour. Second, if there hadn't been a 700, there probably wouldn't have been any more BMW bikes after 1959. But the 700 saved it. It was stylish, practical and affordable.
BMW were back in the black, and the boxer engine bikes just kept coming right through the 60s, all equipped with the trademark Earl's forks.
BMW have always built sports touring motorcycles. Some are distinctly sporty, while others, like this rather sedate R50, are more obviously tourists. This one's clocked 206,000 miles and it's still going strong. But if you're into speed rather than scenery, you want an R69S.
Here was 600 cc's of elegant aggression, the fastest road bike built in Germany, and an acquired taste of things to come. The R90S was easily the biggest boxer yet. It could crack 125 miles an hour, and if you wanted one back in '73, it helped to be well connected.
I was looking through the paperwork that come with it, and at one point it belonged to somebody in Chelsea, London. Well, you don't live in Chelsea unless you're reasonably wealthy. So I did a V5 vehicle search, and it come back. Patrick Litchfield contacted him in London, and he kindly gave me a load of photographs of it because it was the original press bike that he did the publicity shooting of for BMW UK at the time.
I liked the look of it and decided that it might be nice to ride. And at the time, it's hard to believe now, but it seemed to be the sort of cutting edge, state-of-the-art sort of bike. Still beautiful. It just shows you how designs change. Mind you, still BMW, it's got the trademark BMW look to the, well, the whole engine is obviously BMW. But I just looked out of the window and I saw it, and it brought back a flash of nostalgia. I had a Honda 450 before that, and in those days, well, wherever I was riding, I think speed limits were not quite so enforced as they perhaps are now. And as you approached about 100, you definitely got all sorts of wobbles on the Honda, and this was the first one that you didn't. So it was a bit of an interesting, you certainly got, I could go a little faster on it, more safely. But of course, compared to today's bikes, it with the greatest respect in the world, it goes like a camel.
In westerns, the good guys traditionally wore white hats, but in real life, they normally rode the black bikes of Bavaria. So it's somewhat unexpected to find a boring old boxer in something as badass as this.
Jill and Henry are the kind of black leather-clad lifestyle bikers who have Harley-Davidson tattooed on their heart. But they're convinced that the air-cooled twin built by BMW is every bit as good as the one made in Milwaukee.
It's a very simple engine, easy to work on. Jill's taken to them like a duck to water. You know, if we get stuck outside somewhere, she can sort it out herself. It's a very usable, friendly engine.
It's lovely, it's very simple. Basic oil change, plugs, tappets, you can do it. Nothing is hidden, it's all very accessible. I can do it, it's got to be easy.
The gearbox is like any boxer gearbox. It's rudimentary, it's a little bit agricultural, but then if you're slugging up the mountain passes in the Alps, you don't want something that's slick and quick, because you've got the power of the engine pulling you up the hill in fifth gear, so you don't really need a gearbox either.
BMW have always had a thing for three wheels, so when the Boxer engine solos were overtaken on the track, they switched their efforts to sidecar racing. Between 1954 and 1974, they won 19 riders' titles and all 20 manufacturers. But then the two strokes arrived, and it was time for the Boxer to move on once more. This time they swapped tarmac for sand, taking on the Paris-Dakar, the world's toughest off-road race, and winning. Then they used what they'd learned in the desert to build an off-road bike for the road, the R80 GS. A Norwegian customer jumped on his GS, determined to prove it would go anywhere. He decided to go everywhere.
The only modifications that this wandering Viking made to his mount were a 40-litre fuel tank, these homemade aluminium panniers, and here on the back, a washing machine, sort of. He just popped his smalls in here with some water and powder, knowing that the low-speed vibration of the Boxer Twin would remove the stubbornest of stains.
In the 80s, BMW brought out a range of inline liquid-cooled engines, and it looked like a well-earned retirement for the now pensionable Boxer. But instead, the septuagenarian flat twin got to kick back and let its hair down.
Harley set the mark years ago with the film Easy Rider and other things, and there's a whole romantic and kind of nostalgic thing about cruising that makes it appealing to some people. Kind of take it easy, slow down, ride a cruiser. And that's something that we had to spend some time doing. We had to ride differently. We went to different areas to ride. We spent quite a bit of time in the States. It's obviously not an Autobahn machine, but we feel that in the meantime, the BMW fans at the beginning said, "Oh no, you're going to build one of those too." They realized we didn't. We built something very unique and something we feel carries on the BMW tradition.
I think one has to know that our customers, they have a special relationship to BMW and Boxer engines. So this is what we always say, this is the emotional aspect. It starts that this concept is 75 years old, so means more than 500,000 Boxers are still running. So many bikes look similar to the other ones. The Boxer, everybody knows this is a Boxer and this is BMW. Unfortunately, nobody copies it.
BMW invented the sports touring motorcycle with the shaft drive flat twin. But today that traditional market is under siege by Japanese, European, even American manufacturers. And so BMW could be excused perhaps for abandoning the old Boxer and starting afresh. Instead, they've adapted and enlarged it and fitted it in a series of exciting new bikes. Roadsters, cruisers, luxury tourers, a sports bike with the most powerful Boxer engine ever. They've tried to kill it off a couple of times, but it just won't lie down and die. It's been in production for most of the 20th century, and I reckon it'll see out the 21st. The future has never looked brighter for BMW's Boxer.